Hello and welcome to the Most Epic Dream, Episode 6. I am your host, protagonist, and narrator, Drifter, and I'm going to continue the story from where we left off last time. For those of you just now joining us, I would hope that you'd go back to Episode 1 and take a listen, but I am now a vampire in a very highly specialized vampire pack, and the story is building. But the main story, the present story as it goes forward, I would say is 75 to 80% done, and that my final test, so to speak, that I mentioned in the last episode is going to push us toward a very dramatic and insightful conclusion, or personally insightful. However, to understand the fullness of what happens, it's important to go backwards and look at how things were, not for me, but for all the other members of the pack, for all the supporting characters, or the major characters. And you ask me, oh, if it was my dream and it was from first person, how did you know this? Well, in this particular dream, I spent anywhere from, I would say, 6 months to 2 years with this group of people, group of vampires, this pack. And in that amount of time, you can get to know people particularly well, learn about them. Even if they don't say a lot about themselves, there's a lot of information you can glean off of them for what they wear, how they speak, mannerisms, what gossip, and what the other group members had to say. So that's where a lot of this is coming from. Sometimes incomplete. If there is incomplete information, I'm going to be filling it in with my absolute best guesses, but I'm not making this up, you guys. I've seen a lot of comments telling me that I'm faking, and that is ultimately just not the case here. I wish I had this good imagination, but I don't. It just kind of happened. The only thing that I have, the only ability that I have, is to recall what happened. So, the first character that we're going to learn about today, I don't know how many I'm doing in this episode because I don't know how long it's going to take, is the businessman. And the businessman is unique in the group, very visually very distinct, because everybody's young. In this pack of vampires, they all appear to be, I don't know, mid-20s, early 30s, very early 30s at the absolute oldest. I mean, this is a group somewhere in the 25 to maybe like 31, 32 range. Everybody clustered in there. That's everybody's apparent age, or somewhere around the peak of maturity and adulthood for a normal human being, with the two exceptions being the teenage girl, the queen, the leader, the true leader, the hindmost, if you've read the Ringworld books, and the businessman. The businessman appears very, very old, very ancient. I would put his age at, say, 50, but the kind of 50 that comes from living a very hard life, or maybe in his mid-60s, or maybe even a little bit older. He was balding, but not entirely bald. He had the whole nice little row of silver hair around the bald head. He wore glasses, but I know that the glasses were cosmetic only. He could see fine, but he wore them when he thought it was important to be perceived as frail or older. Everybody else wore trendy clothes, normal clothes, show-off clothes, club clothes. He wore suits all the time. We'd go out, and it was still suits. I think he might have been a little bit too old for the clubbing scene, so he just wore his suit, his business suit. They were very nice. I'm kind of a noob at business suits. I don't know the brands, the makes, what's good about them, but when you look at this man, you see money. You see shoes that match the belt, that match the suit, that have a tie, that matches the pin, that matches the look, and it's a serious face all the time. That's the businessman. His specialty was money. I had a lot of people ask in the comments, oh, this group of vampires, they killed people. How did they get the money for this? How did they, if you rape this person, how do you get away? Why is there no investigation? And I don't entirely know for sure, because I'd honestly never thought about it until then. But if I had to make a guess, if I had to bet my money, I would bet that this fell under his realm of responsibility. Every house, every safe house that they owned, it was his. It was his property, or the property of his company, or the property of his family's company, or of his family. We'll get to that in just a little bit. Everything was his. All the money that we spent, his money. All the services that we employed, his. Everything, his. And that was his job. That was his... I'm starting to repeat myself a little bit here, but he was there to make money and run the face of the organization, to make everything legal so that nobody would come looking when they killed people, when there was trouble with the law, when something questionable was going down. He was the person that was there to throw around the money, to call in the favors, to make all the bad stuff go away, and he was really serious about his job. Of all the people in the group, I would say he was probably the most serious, or maybe the second most serious, but we'll continue that later. Very serious man, definitely the most tight-lipped. Everybody else in the group was talkative. They had a lot to talk about. They were happy, jolly, joyful, or expressive. He was very not, very reserved, very stone-faced. Like the wrinkles were set in stone. They were the same every day. The wrinkles never moved. And that was him. That was what he did and what he was. This person is one that I know probably the least about because I was least able to talk to him. He was very difficult to get any information out of. However, thankfully, the thinker, he had more to say about the businessman than the businessman had to say about himself. As a matter of fact, the thinker, he liked to talk a lot, and he didn't really care. He was the big gossip guy, so I got a lot of information from him. How accurate or how true it was is only true as to his telling me, or true as to me imagining him telling me in the dream, so there you go. And where should I go from here? The past of the businessman. The businessman's past was different than everybody else's. Everybody else had some sort of, happenstance, some sort of luck. But him, he was chosen. He was selected, called from an idea and not a place or a thing. The businessman was very, very wealthy. I don't know for sure, but I believe that he was born as his human self was born somewhere late 1800s, early 1900s. Actually, it would have to be later 1800s. He joined the group in the early 1900s. That was where his mental. I would just say, let's just throw a date out there. Let's just say 1875. I don't know, 1901, something like that. Very old, maybe even older. And from what I hear, he was born very poor, but became a self-made businessman, very wealthy. I don't honestly know what. It didn't, at this point in his life, he was mostly managing stocks and investments and no hands-on, but at the time that he would have lived, this would have been kind of like the wild, wild west of industrialism, so it was probably some form of manufacturing, probably cutting a lot of corners, workers' rights, that sort of thing, but he became very wealthy. And not only did he become wealthy, but he managed to maintain this wealth throughout the course of his life. I believe the words the thinker said to me was, his enemies had a habit of disappearing, or accidents would happen to them, or he would bargain deals or barter for deals that should not go down, and through some force of might or threat they would go through. He was very corrupt, very, well, serious, not that much unlike his current self. I doubt they had to coax him very much into the killing. And thus was his life, and his life was very average for his type of person. Callous, cold, rich, but coming to an end. And somehow, in some unknown way, the further we go back here, the less information I have. I'm sorry, this is the one I know the least about, so I'm starting with this one. In some way, he was contacted. As the thinker said, the alpha and the queen, or the teenage girl, contacted him. I think that they were the only two members in the group at that particular time, and they offered him a deal. His deal was he gets immortality in exchange for all of his assets and his services, and at his stage in life he was incredibly old and dying, and like all old, dying, powerful people, they would trade it all to live, especially to live forever. So he took the deal, and the gift that she gave to him was different. Everybody else had a specialty. The thinker could think, I was strong. The seductress was intrapersonally clever, but this guy, his only gift was his agedness. She gave him the gift to where instead of returning to his old age, he simply stayed about where he was, or a little bit younger. He had to maintain the look of the businessman, the look of the aged, learned, respectable individual member of community, in exchange for eternal life and all of his money, etc., etc. He, of course, accepted this gift on his deathbed, but as he grew older, I believe he began to regret his decision, especially seeing much younger vampires than himself every day, getting to have fun with younger victims and younger everything. Everything had a sort of age facet to him. Seeing everybody else younger bothered him a lot. Another interesting thing about this businessman was that, unlike everybody else, he also had to maintain a personal front, a physical presence in this world where everybody else was tied, cut off from family, friends, acquaintances, and anything but the group. He was the opposite. He had more responsibilities outside the group than he did in the group. instead of talking about people as food or cattle or making fun of the average or this and that, he had to consider himself more human, more of a person than everybody else. And he had to talk to others as equals, or in some cases when he was doing big businesses, he had to take the inferior or subservient role to somebody else. So this is very unusual, very unusual. Nobody else had any contact with the outside world, except for going out, whereas he had a very long list of friends, associates, colleagues, contacts, and everything else that he could call. And well, he also had a family. That was an unusual one. Nobody else had a family, or at least not one that I'd known about. But he actually had a family when he took this deal. When he accepted this deal for When he accepted the deal for eternal life, he traded in his family as well, not as servants to the vampires or food or anything, or well, kind of, but in order to maintain his vast wealth, his influence, and everything else, one of the things he had to do was to give everything over to his family in his son's name, in his children's name. And the thing was, they got all the money, they got the house, they got the mansion, the life, but he made the decisions. He would contact them with the business decisions. He would tell them what they want built, where they want it. That would be the safe houses, and the other thing, the research equipment. But we'll get to the research equipment later. That's a different story. That all went through his family. And of course, he outlived his son and his grandson. I think we were on the great-grandson, or maybe great-great-grandson now, but his family, even though he founded the money, his family became one of the cemented old money families, and I don't know where the fuck it was. Let's just say New England. Let's just say New England, okay? Old money family. But he made all the decisions, and it was a very personal, private matter. If a decision was not made, if he sent a decision in and it wasn't made through them, through his what was his wealth, or they squandered it, or got in trouble with the law, or drew any attention his way, they would get a visit from grandfather. And let's just say you really don't want a visit from grandfather, so pretty much all the decisions went his way. And thus is the story of the thinker, the wealthy man, the wealthiest man that traded his youth. Well, he never had the youth, but he traded his money, his life, his name, and forwent youth in order to live forever, and seemed to somewhat regret now being old, but also somewhat enjoy living forever and continuing his powerful businessman money-making streak of just more, and more. That is his story. Now, the next story, in reverse chronological order, we're going to the thinker. The thinker is also the person that I know the second least about, because he liked to talk a lot about other people, but not quite as much about himself. I learned more from him through the Dominatrix than anybody else, or I learned a little bit from the Alpha too. The businessman didn't have much to say as usual, and the thinker did tell me about himself and his life and his experiences, though it was more sparse than his discussing of everybody else. But let's see what I can say about the thinker. The thinker is a very tall, skinny individual, red hair, and I believe his human, normal, previous past life would have started somewhere in the, I'm guessing, mid-30s-ish. I don't know, my backwards age is a little bit funny, but he was a college student in the mid-50s, I guess a little bit before integration happened here in the United States, but he was a college student, I believe it was med student or biology or something like that, and he was studying hematology specifically, the study of blood, the science of human blood and how it relates to the body, what it does. But he had a problem. His problem was he was alone in the world. His family, they had died. I believe they had some sort of insurance insurance policy and some property that he sold in order to get the money to go to college, or at this point it would be university or graduate school, in order to get his degree in hematology to become a researcher, a doctor, a really true pure scientist, studying well, not a pure science, only pure science is math, but studying hematology. And it didn't go quite according to plan. He was a brilliant, brilliant student, brilliant, but interpersonal skills were very, very weak. He wasn't popular with the rest of the students. They didn't like him too much. He was the class Melvin, for those of you that read the Fu comics. Always setting the curve, always making everybody else look dumb, and ultimately he was pretty arrogant with his knowledge. Still is, actually. I guess he didn't change much there. This resulted in a lot of ridicule, isolation, extracism, what word am I looking for? Not extradition. Boy, I'm forgetting the right word, but he didn't fit in well with his peers. Matter of fact, he didn't have any true peers or true friends. He was kind of a loner, just him and his books and his research and his desire to do better, be smarter, make the world a better place, I suppose. Very naive, and that was his life, tormented, sad, lonely. And he thought he had a sort of friend or a sort of acquaintance in his professor. I think that it was going to be his doctorate or perhaps his master's. I'm not sure, but he was doing some research on blood, something, I don't even remember what it was. It was something complicated. I don't remember. It's been a little while. And his professor was helping him, his advisor, his one constant, maybe he would call friend, person that didn't hate him for so many years, was there advising him, helping with the research, but not helping in a very large capacity. Those of you that have done independent research at a university know that they're there mostly just for advice, or they'll glance over some numbers and say, this looks funny, or I think you're doing okay, that sort of thing. But what he didn't know was that this particular professor was really, really liking his research, and that this professor, while pretending to be his friend, really hated the thinker. He hated him because he was jealous, because he could see that it wouldn't be too long, too many years down the road, that the thinker would be very much so smarter than him, very much so more successful, perhaps even have his job or be his boss, that his potential was that great if left alone. And he wanted to make a bigger name for himself, to get away, he didn't want to be number two, to be second, to be last to his student. So he was trying to come up with a plan, and the plan he found was to steal, to plagiarize, because the thinker's research turned out to be quite revolutionary, quite brilliant, quite upending in whatever the hematology world. I really don't know. But it was something that would have made waves, it would have put him on the map, it would have got him noticed. Ooh, that's a good burp. And I say "and" a lot. It's really difficult to talk this long with no script. I'm sitting here in a room, sunlight coming in through all the windows, really enjoying the sunlight when talking about this. It seems really different to be back. But it would have put him on the map. And his professor saw this and decided to more or less steal the research, to plagiarize it, to take all the information, all the data, to claim it as his own and brush it up a little bit. And he did, and before the thinker finished all of it, the professor went ahead and got to the conclusion part, fudged a little bit of data, and published it. And it was a really huge hit. Ultimately, the thinker found out about it, and when confronting his professor, the professor admitted a moral weakness and promised to correct this wrong by doing... It was something to ensure that the thinker would pass, that he wouldn't fail, that he wouldn't have to work hard, and that he would get his degree. And it's like, oh, don't worry about it. You wrote this one paper, and that's all you're going to have to do the rest of the year here, blah, blah, blah. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. When in reality, he was planning to screw him over, some sort of academic dishonesty, some sort of cheating, or just mark him tardy a lot of times or late for class when that wasn't the case. But unfortunately for this professor, the readership on articles involving hematology was a little bit broader than what he had in mind. At this point, the Alpha and the Queen, the teenage girl, again decided to pay a very special business. The businessman would visit. The businessman would have been a member of this group at the time, but I don't know what he was doing. It was only told to me that they paid a visit. And she or he perhaps had read the article and was impressed, and they decided that this is the individual that they need in the group, in the pack of vampires, because we need to understand what we are. In this modern age, there's no more magic, there's no more nonsense or spirits. This will help us know who we are, what we can do, make us stronger, better, all these sort of things. This is the way of the future. And they wanted to recruit this brilliant person into the group. Well, they paid a visit to the professor, and things didn't go as planned. It didn't take too long before they found out that the professor wasn't the person that wrote the article. Uh-oh, what do you know? You didn't write this brilliant article on blood research, says the two vampires in your living room? Well, guess what? You're in deep shit now. After some, let's say, interrogation, he confessed that it was the student that wrote the article. They asked about the student, and the professor related the story in a not too unsimilar manner to what I just said, and they liked this better. Instead of another businessman, another professional, another self-made man, they would be able to recruit another person that had lived through life the hard way, that had been broken down, that had lost fights, that understood power and control and restraint and all these sort of things. So they went to go talk to the student. The deal they offered the student was about like the deal they offered the businessman. His job was to ultimately protect the group, to do research on blood, and that was pretty much it. Protect and do research in exchange for eternal life. The student accepted, or the thinker as he would become called, and he was given the gift of mental dexterity is the word I would use. Not to say smarter than he was before, or superhuman, or like a brainiac from the Superman comics, but he was given the ability to think for very long periods of time. Mental stress, mental strain, exhaustion, these sort of things didn't bother him as much anymore, or at least that's what he told me. He told me he didn't feel particularly smarter or brighter, but he noticed that he could work many, many more hours tirelessly, effortlessly, no slip-ups in his work. And I guess that makes you smarter if you can do that for so many more hours without screwing up. Because I know when I'm an engineer, and when I do my work for so long, my brain starts to die after a little bit. And such was his gift. Brilliant, of course, stronger than human because he's a vampire. And he also got the opportunity to pay back his professor, who happened to just still be in the house. I believe chained up, strung up, tied up somewhere, very, very helpless. And the thinker had a very fun day or two with him, paying him back for the stolen research and thanking him for pointing the vampires his way. And if I remember correctly, the words he said were, when the police saw that mess, not the police, what was it? It was something about even the cleaning crew really not wanting to clean that up. Like the people that cleaned up dead bodies, they called in for extra help. The thinker also saw to it to pay back some of those students that had given him such a hard time earlier in life. Unfortunately, he wasn't allowed to murder everybody because, as he said, the businessman said that would cause too much problems, but he saw that a select few had very select accidents and falls and breaks and car crashes and other sort of things. This wasn't the Superman spy thing. This was more like him beating somebody to death and then probably just crashing their car for fun, because it wouldn't hurt him anyway, and it would make it look like a car crash, and back in the 50s the investigative science wasn't that great anyway. And so now we have the thinker, the former student, the former loner, isolated from his group, fitting now well into a group that he happens to like, being given the gift of long thinking, mental dexterity, as he said, and very much so loving it, enjoying where he is now, enjoying his newfound power over almost everything else in the world. And as he said, my job here was to unlock the mysteries of what we are. And he said that he didn't always work as hard as he used to because, well, I have forever to figure this out. It doesn't matter if I get it today or tomorrow, because when you have eternity, all the days really feel the same. And he had some problems because even though it was the Queen that wanted him to do this research, she was reluctant about some things. He couldn't study the specializations. He couldn't take blood or tissue samples from her. He couldn't study too many people. There were a lot of restrictions. He always wanted access to everything. More. And she was always, no. And it bothered him a lot. It irritated her to be asked, but he put up and he made do because, well, we have eternity to figure this out. And thus is the story of the thinker. Moving on now, I'm going to tell you the story of the Alpha. This is a very, very short story because, as I said, the businessman was the second most tight-lipped. He was the most tight-lipped. He never mentioned his past, never directly, never specifically told me who he was, where he came from, anything. The thinker didn't know. The businessman didn't know. The queen was too out of her mind to know or care, and the Alpha never said. I was able to glean weird little things from him. He said something sometime that seemed reminiscent of the Civil War, something. He said something that seemed like it would have fit into a Greco-Roman world. He mentioned horses a lot. Well, not a lot, but some old sayings would creep in, and he would say something about a horse or something about some kind of grain or some tool or an expression that I've never heard before. And I heard more than one language come from this man. I do not know how old he is for sure. If I had to guess, I would guess at least 200 years old, maybe up to a maximum of I don't know. The maximum would be really high, maybe thousands. I'm not feeling thousands. He didn't have this thousands feel, but it seemed possible because he seemed to mention a few very ancient things. But that might have been just for reading. We all had plenty of time to read. At least 200. Let's say a minimum of 200, maybe more. Well, that's it for this episode. It was a little bit of a filler, but bear with me. The next episode we're going to start picking back up again. I have two more stories to tell. The story of the Dominatrix and the story of the Queen. These are a little bit more heavy-hitting than the three that I told you today. We've covered the males, we'll be covering the females next, and then the episode after that, we will be driving toward the conclusion of this story, and you will start to see things really tying together and panning out and playing out, and I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you later.